one of the questions we ask ourselves on a weekly basis is why is it so difficult to engage the public and politicians on climate change? 2012 will undoubtedly be remembered as a year of sport, but it'll also be remembered as a year of consequences, of climate consequences. And I've worked in this field for 20 years now, and I think the gap between where we are and where we need to be is much larger now than it was 20 years ago. The Earth Summit in 1992 lasted 3 weeks. It was attended by John Major, George Bush and Francois Mitterrand. The one this year lasted 3 days, and it was attended by Nick Clegg. Now, we know a lot about the things that don't work, and we've been trying to draw some of the lessons from those. So we found that putting the frighteners on people really doesn't have a very big impact, doesn't last very long. Neither does shaming them, trying to embarrass them into doing something. Again, not very effective. But we also know from research that's been going on in other areas that we have an inherent aversion to loss, and that we're not alone. We actually share that with some of the primates. So that's quite an inherent trait within us. And we also exhibit this thing called reference dependence. So we relate what goes on in the world around us to what's happening here and now. So we have a cool summer, we tend to think that the story around climate change must be wrong. We also know that we like to be part of a group, and we can use that to our advantage. So messages like this, 99% of people leave this wood exactly as they find it, are often more powerful than things that just say, do not destroy the forest. The other thing we know, and I spent 15 years trying to follow this, and I now know it doesn't work, is that people are not empty vessels. So in other words, they're not just empty vessels into which we can pour scientific facts and evidence, and then sooner or later they'll jump to the right conclusion. So for us, we've been thinking about what are the other approaches that we might use, and we've heard about one of them today, which is one that we think is quite useful and exciting, and it's the idea of framing. So it's this idea that we see the world through different frames of reference. And frames are important because information that falls outside of our frame of reference tends to be discarded. The frame gets retained, but the information that falls outside it tends to be discarded. And frames also help to define our relation to problems and solutions. And it creates this kind of mental map. It's one of those. The problem is we can't create 60 million frames when we're trying to talk to the population at large. Now, social scientists, as many of you will be aware, have been doing a lot of work on this value modes or value systems, and they like to classify people and give them nice fancy terms like smooth sailing, tomorrow's people, etc. But actually those can be broken down into 3 groups: pioneers, settlers, and prospectors. And briefly, if we look at those, settlers, or those who are sustenance-driven, we tend to use terms like security, comfort, and family when we're referring to those. For the prospectors, or the outer-directed, it's a slightly different set of terms. So it's things to do with position, what's right, the right neighbourhood, keeping up with the Joneses, that sort of thing. And for those who are inner-directed, again, it's a different set of values to do with information, taking risks, individuality and knowledge, those sort of things. Now, why is that important? Because a lot of the messaging around climate change has been developed by pioneers for pioneers. And for those who don't fall into that group, it falls outside their frame of reference, and therefore it's like a different language. It's a difficult thing for them to understand. So if we're going to respond to these things, we need to be able to develop our messages so that people can access them and engage with them. Now, as you will have picked up today, and we picked up in some of the debates we had this morning, this is a controversial area. Not everybody agrees with this. But for us, it's about how we open a dialogue, how we start that discussion so that we can bring new people into the argument. And we think there's a choice to be made. We either carry on as we are and hope that sooner or later the penny drops for people, or we have to think about new ways of doing it. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. Thank you.